here we are at the beginning of the 1300 turn in Blenheim, and Chitpole picks the command points. Not a good point for the French. The English have decided, hey, oh shit. I forgot to check for my fire, for the fires. I gotta make a check for them. But the English have decided to throw their artillery in this time, and the French are using their one pick to make sure their artillery gets to fire. Neither side has a whole lot of artillery firing, but it seems like the most effective thing right now, sort of guaranteed to do something. The English have to be careful though. They only have so much time to push the French back, and they barely are across the river actually. If I hadn't guaranteed that Eugen would move his forces, I would have just lost the game here. Wow, that would have sucked. Okay, well, we had some of the fires die out, but none of the important ones, the ones that could really kind of change the nature of the game at this point, are still burning pretty heavily. It kind of makes sense that the ones deep behind, where they were set on fire probably a while ago and the French had to pull out of there, as compared to these, which were set during the bombardment actually, would go out early, although those might be more questionable fires than a village that was raging for some time already. The English won the initiative, and I chose to use the artillery. Had to check in the rules, make sure that's allowed. Looks like it is. You can pick any limb you like. The only questionable thing is there's the division between whether Eugen or Marlborough would be rolling for it. Since all the artillery is under Marlborough's troops, well, these are under Eugen's wing now, but I kind of just said, well, we'll use the Marlborough value there, even though the only ones really that, I think there's one firing from here and one from here. The artillery pick was a really low payoff one, but I don't get to shoot my guns if I don't pick it, and I'm set up so that, hey, maybe I could shoot them. Okay, an artifact of the chip bolt design that I do not like here with the artillery and the artillery fire rolls in particular, not so much the chip bolt design, but it's to my advantage not to fire at a stack with enemy artillery in it. Granted, I might get more effect if I fire at enemy artillery, but chances are I won't cause the artillery itself to become limbered. What I'll likely cause is I fired at them, they got a shot back at me, so if I'm stacked with any infantry, they might disorder my infantry. So I just picked on things that were not artillery targets, and I unlimbered my guns there as a second action. Now we're on chip poles. There ain't a lot of French choices here, are there? Holbeck. And you know what? I think I forgot to do counter battery fire last turn. I had one gun which could have done some with the Brits. Looking at that. Holbeck, that's this command. And we can't charge, so we're not going to be able to close completely, but we can start lining up to launch an attack on the village. Okay, all the limbs are done. You see the Dutch line and what are those, Hanoverians? I don't remember who's who. I think Hanover's that orange. I have to look this up just because, yeah, that's Hanover. The Dutch and the Hanoverians have moved up, coming under canister fire in a couple of places. Some disorder, nothing routed. Next turn, a couple of units could move forward and launch an actual assault. However, if I do that, that slows everything's movement down to one hex. The other alternative is to dress my line and prepare for it, but I might get shot up all to crap during that. Also, on Eugen's, well, it's all Eugen's units that are moving. On his flank, we've got a couple of the infantry and the cav are pushing up into a position. Now, the danger here is you don't want to be in bog when you launch your attack. And I don't think you can do a charge through the bog. So there could be some advantage to trying to move forward and interdict that movement. There is certainly a better position for the French here, but they don't want to launch a cav charge through the bog themselves. I think they can. I'm not positive about this. I have to look at the rules. But when it comes down to the shock, they're not going to want to do that. So we might be seeing a carousel here happening. No matter what, though, what's kind of cool, these guys aren't going to be making contact, right? They're more than one hex away. And in fact, neither of these aren't British cav. They're not going to full tilt charge. So there's a certain degree of safety to moving close to them. Kind of interesting feel to the system. No cav charge whatsoever can be through the bog. So if I position units here, I could prevent these from advancing unless the infantry clears the way for me. It's kind of interesting. The Allies have a decent amount of cav. I may want to keep an eye out, although it's very hard to see if I have any. I think I'm looking for dragoons. I think most of my dragoons are over here, which might end up converting to infantry. Just to get through the bog at least. Well, that's hard. I have to link them to another line. Ouch. Okay. Another factor that I'm thinking of as kind of an option to help hide the number of chits that you're throwing in, because it's very obvious when you shake the cup and reach in how many chits there are there perhaps, is allow players to throw a number of CP markers that they didn't draw into the cup along with their limbs. That can really, and you draw a CP marker and you just hand it back to the player. That's, it's just a dummy in there. But that's a real nice way that would be able to hide some information that I think is a little too easy to garner from the game just by the pulling out of a cup. An interesting note, the terrible terrain here, this marsh and stream combined, means you have to spend more than half your movement points to cross the stream. That has a nice effect. Now, many games have this. If you don't have enough movement points to move a hex, you can always move a hex except into prohibited terrain. I don't see that here. And it works very nicely because it means you need a command to cross this stream. So I had to roll for Churchill, and he failed. So he's not going over. And he'd need to be in command several times to get his whole formation over. It's really an impediment, and one that makes sense, that if you weren't given orders specifically to attack across the stream at that point, if you weren't given that extra oomph, maybe you'd be holding back. Of course, here's what's wrong. Maybe you'd be forming up. It's not like you can't do that. It's that you have an option one way or the other. Do you form your line, or do you try to cross the stream without your orders? And if you choose the latter, you get nothing probably. Further element, which maybe makes sense, or maybe you're used to from, if you're used to earlier combat games, things like Great Battles of History or the Musket and Pike series, stacking is observed at all times. In fact, even if you move into a hex you can stack with, you have to stop there and you become the bottom unit in the stack and be restacked on the next turn. That's very inhibiting, especially when it comes to retreats, etc. So you got to leave little channels of retreat open. Yeah, I don't know about how I'm doing that. I tried to launch an attack here and failed, where things are getting kind of close. And then over here, Clown Bolt is actually pushing forward a little bit. He's taking the conservative approach forward. I think I cheated with the Bonzak here. He had to roll to move because he's crossing a river and going up a slope. I didn't count the slope probably. Counted as a 2-hex move. It's a 3-point move. So he's got to roll each time he wants to ooze those guys out of that swamp. Presumably, instead of rolling, I could line up so that I've got everybody on the swamp, but then they've got to change facing, dress their line, prepare to cross. Ugly, ugly situation no matter how you look at it. I want to get him behind the marshy stream, actually in front of it to some extent, because he doesn't serve any purpose back there. The terrain that's important is between the two streams. We're done with all the regular activations and the no limbs. Now we go to some of the cleanup type stuff. There's really not much to do here except the strategic movement. So essentially we're moving to 1330 here. Wouldn't be facing this in a free setup, but in this game, Marcin is so overmatched in terms of the size of a front that he's got to command. Now, as I start to slide over the commands under Talar, that's going to take some of the pressure off, but basically he has to choose 2 units he won't be using. And because of the difficulty of crossing the stream and the fact that these guys already have been able to do it, I'm shifted over here to command my left flank of the center, which may be more important to me. Right, the turn opens up with the English getting a lousy command point pool and the French getting a decent one. So we're going to see the French doing a lot more during the limbs. One observation I have, I read someone was trying to say this is, some kind of mini monster. This is about equivalent in size. More counters. A little heavier density of counters, but it's not too far in terms of the effort and time required from, the great battles of the American Civil War games or the smaller CWB games. The larger of the musket and pike games. It's no huge game. It obviously is going to take more than a couple of hours, but the turns flow fairly fast. So I don't know if I'll get to this in the review. I never know what I'm going to actually say in a review. If I wrote down notes, I would remember, but that's effort, right? The one thing that kind of gets in the way, and why it's more like musket and pike, is the combat, especially the cav charges, is going to be kind of complicated. I think we're going to see some this time because the French activated a couple of cav squadrons. Assuming, though, that the Allies are going to be pushing forward. And without them pushing forward, those cav charges can't happen. So I'm not sure. Because even a carousel doesn't work well in the swamp. English won the die roll and Holstein Beck got the initiative. I didn't want to do an assault. It would have been really a ragtag affair, and I know how those tend to work out when units come in a disorganized fashion, at least how they should work out. So I built myself a somewhat more powerful line to move forward with. Yes, some of these won't have contact right away, but that's okay. I had to stretch back here in order to keep this unit in command. So I'm expecting next turn to be the turn that those guys hit. That's a shame because it means I'm going to be facing the French artillery again. I kind of had hoped I could have shocked just the artillery here in the front, but there's a whole wave of artillery here that I wouldn't have been able to hit anyway, and it would have slowed down my ability to present a good front line there. Now, here's one of the things is I can't tell if the system will reward this play or not. This is what should be more effective, but until we see it in action, it's going to be hard to tell whether or not it would be better to just advance into combat with a few units and count on the rest to kind of come up and fill in the lines as we go. As is applicable to this era, the artillery fire obviously is really good at breaking up an advance, disordering the enemy units, and possibly causing them to collapse if you keep hitting disordered units. If they don't take the time to reform, they're just gonna, well, they're either gonna rout or they're gonna take enough casualties that they're getting close to just dissolving as an effective unit. And normal fire, though, uses the same procedure, which it doesn't really affect the strength of the unit at all, which isn't too important, to tell you the truth. What it affects is the unit resistance to further disorders. The morale gets worse and worse. And when you flip a unit over, what we'll notice here is that a frontside unit has an extra movement point or extra movement points over a disordered unit. So it slows down your advance. All very nicely done. I've seen systems where you put a disorder marker on something and that becomes a modifier on the movement and such not. It was clever to have the counter flip be that disordered side so they could represent a couple of different factors really nicely there. Works well. We'll see how it works when we get into, looking at how shock combat works. Because I have no idea, I've read the rules, but I haven't thought about it too much. I figure that's why I'm playing, is to be able to see how it works without just sitting there and running thought experiments. Anyway, the artillery fired to some effect, broke up some of this line, didn't do much on this side, not much on the counter battery. We're finally seeing some clearing in the smoke, so some of the fire is possible. And now the English have to consider Orkney coming back and getting back on those guns and trying to cross this way instead, because the French have been advancing. In fact, under cover of the smoke, they've been advancing, and we're kind of presenting a threat no matter what. So the no limb phase is pretty much over. A lot of units either failing to get a reaction, an action that they tried to roll for, with, so the right flank here under Legion, I could advance a hex without rolling, but there were some people going into higher terrain that it would have to deform my line in ways that I didn't want to, so I had to roll for both of these units to get the results I wanted. Essentially what it means is, yes, I do want to pick their counters, but I didn't have many counter picks this particular turn, so it significantly slowed me down. I have the fear that perhaps between my blundering and an inability to roll activations, we might see this battle not be very decisive at all, just because troops are having trouble getting forward. Over here, Clarenbolt had to make a roll in order to start an assault against those artillery. He didn't do that. Now, when you assault artillery, they get a kind of a free fire against you, so that could be a problem. But they have no troops on them, so that's not a terribly defensible position right now, and it could break the whole English left flank if it happened. Now I've got the out of command unit. Now here, you get to move a single hex to try to regain command. 2 hexes with cav. And then we go to kind of just the cleanup for the turn. Nothing was lost, so we're not going to see any change in the numbers here. And we'll be moving up to the 1400 turn. Say I'm never thrilled, just like I'm, disturbed by the incongruity of NATO symbols on some early games. This doesn't suffer that. It might actually have an advantage in it just because there is no indication. It's very difficult to see what the units are among the cav and the infantry with the dragoons and the hussars and such not. So some kind of symbology rather than the picture. Now the picture is serving as that purpose, but it's difficult to see. Most games, give you some kind of a line or a dot or something that's very, very, once we started getting to these kind of detailed images of a figure on there. It's almost a minis type approach where a lot of the information on the counter, a lot of the potential information space on the counter is being eaten up by an image, which is pretty to look at maybe, but isn't as good at conveying information. Picture with 1,000 words or not, when it's a tiny image on a thing that looks very similar to other tiny images on them, it all just kind of blurs together from any distance. However, one thing that not having colorful markings and such not on it does is it kind of preserves the appearance of a real battlefield here more. So, you know, everything comes with trade-offs. But similar to the NATO symbols argument, I don't like to see modern military time being used on the turn record track. You know, I want to see hey, it's noon, it's 1:30, whatever. That just suits me better somehow. Although, to tell you the truth, I'm kind of glad Great Battles of History doesn't have a time track, because that would seem anachronistic to me, actually. The concepts were there, but time was more malleable at that point. Poor Marcin is really struggling here, and running back to this side to try to command these, because it looks almost certain that we're going to see action over here. Over here, maybe, maybe not, and worst comes to worst, Max has some forces he can activate there. But it's looking like, you know, I have this choice, right flank or left flank in the center. Which one do I want to support? And it's really a tough call. And, you know, when it comes down to it, it's command issues that prevent the French from winning this battle historically. So it's absolutely appropriate that you should have this trouble. And I don't know how much you would in the free setup. You'd be able to set the French up so that they wouldn't be struggling quite so much, I think. I'm not sure. There's a lot of territory to cover and not a lot of Bavarians, and Max is limited to the Bavarians. So. You'd also have commanders. These red marked commanders are supposed to be Bavarians, so you wouldn't have them accessible for the French. So you'd end up with less leaders. Now, less units might not cause too much of a problem. Well, yeah, except they only have so much frontage based on the range that the line officer can exert, and that is becoming problematic too, as we see with Banzak. He's got too big a unit for his command radius. But I would certainly shake up who's where in a lot of ways in a free, if I was using the free setup with the French. And to tell you the truth, maybe with the Allies too, although they seem to be pretty well able to coordinate. I don't know. The villages definitely channel the movement with the fires in them that prevent you from that's their biggest hassle so far, has been waiting for these fires to not affect them too much. And oh shit, I moved into one here. Into a smoke. Disordered. Oops. Okay, the Anglo-Dutch army gets the initiative again here in the 2 p.m. turn. Trying to avoid the military numerology. They also got more picks, but neither side should know that. And it's interesting, you know, when I said, hey, throw the extra chips in, that's not really necessarily a variant to the game, in the sense that if you had someone else picking the chits, they wouldn't be able to do it. If you had, say, a device that dropped one chit at a time, they wouldn't be able to determine how many. So the idea is really to get around that mechanical piece of information that I don't think should be available. The game seems to actually go out of its way to try to make it difficult to know how many chits there are in the cup. But if somebody's reaching in and fingering the chits, they can count them. I'm not saying they will, but they'll have an idea at least. So anyway, both sides picked their artillery just as a forewarning. But the Brits are giving Holstein back the first action. They got the initiative again. Well, actually, Eugen got the initiative. And I'm doing an assault here. So we're going to get to see how that works. Now, in terms of movement, everything's just going to slide forward 1 hex. I'll come back after I do that and we'll see how the actual the engagement works there. Because we don't have to differentiate, I'm not using chits for standing or moving assaults. Everything that's moved that's adjacent to a French unit is doing a moving assault. Now, what that means is both sides are going to get fire at half strength first. And I'll go down the line and do that, but we'll see here. So this will be a 3 instead of the full... no, I'm sorry. This will be a 2 because you're still only allowed to fire 4 strength points out. And this will also be a 2. So we've got 2 fires at 2. I'll use a die for each color. I have to find the combat chart. There's not any terrain effect here. Oh, wait. There's an elevation change. That's going to be a 1 point shift in both directions. So the French have the advantage. And the French should win this handily. They have a longer line of more troops, better troops, in terms of, you know, they're formed better. They have the Irish up here that have the better morale, etc. They have the terrain advantage. This should not go well for the Dutch and their allies. But we'll see. Okay, so the French roll crappy. And they were over here on the 3 chart. And that'll be a D-2. And the English are going to be down on the 1 chart. They rolled a 5. They get a straight D. So both sides are going to have to make a disorder check. And the English are at -2 for this, but +1 for their damage, their disordered situation, whereas the French are at even. So I think the English are at +1. I'm sorry, no, the English are at -1. It looks to me like both sides get disordered. Oh shit, I forgot to fire the French artillery in there too. Let's get that effect too. We got some... That actually happens before the English even get to fire. We got some canister coming in there. And that's a D+2, which is going to give a +3 disorder. Okay, that +3 disorder was effective. So actually the English may not have gotten a chance to fire, and the French may not be damaged. So the effect of that is then we roll a quick die to see 5 and 6, 6. We got a rout, so the French were not even affected by this. The canister, which fired first, would have routed this. And now rout movement, I think, is full movement points. Which is only 4. So we'll start running this way. That's only 2. Okay. Let's do a couple more of these, because this is really the beginning of what we're seeing with the initial engaged fire. So what we really have to do is define what the firings are in these other close spaces. So obviously this unit and this unit are both determined, but the Allies don't know what this unit is going to be firing at, or stack of units actually, but only the top unit gets to fire. And likewise here, it looks like we get an extra French unit, which I'll probably use to try to cut the Allied line by hitting this hex with a double shot. Here, it's not so important what I do. Since I have artillery here, well, I'm facing 3 units, so I'll do the artillery first over here on this edge. And that's a 16-pound gun. It's using canister no matter what. That means we're on here. I don't think we have a height advantage there. And we don't have the village fire advantage on artillery. So let's open that up. And we get a big D+3, which is likely going to affect it. We get a successful effect, and that's just going to be an initial disordering of the unit as it approaches. Now we get simultaneous fire, and I'm going to be firing the French across. Well, yeah, I'm going to actually fire here and here, try to reduce, try to get a unit off the line. Although it might be better to leave a damaged unit in the line because there's more units there. But this thing won't be able to retreat, and it's just going to dissolve in that case. All right. So, let's see. English versus French, normal fire, no terrain advantage whatsoever. Bogs don't help you on fire combat at all. I'm in a village, but I don't get the village fire stacking benefit, I don't think. I'm going to have to look that sucker up, am I not, or is it? Village stack text, 10.3. Yeah, that was a more complicated roll. Okay. Yeah, it has to be at least 2 battalion of foot to get that advantage. And it's just a shift. Okay, so I think we're just firing straight up here. And both are on the 4 table. The French again roll kind of crappy, getting a D-2. The English get a D. We do the quick morale check. Okay, and the English were at -1. Both sides are hit. The English are going to have to make a check to see what the effect of hitting their disordered unit is. It's on the low side, which means it gets a reduced marker. So that was this English unit, flips over to the reduced -2, it's almost destroyed, and the French take a disorder. Alright, I think we pull away for a while now, and I come back and report on what the overall is. I think you see how the mechanism works. We're just going down the line, shooting what gets shot. Whether or not the Allies wanted to fire a second unit into here, I'm not sure. I think so because the artillery's there. So let me take care of that as well. That should have been simultaneous, but it doesn't really matter. Well, see, the problem is the French are shooting at that unit. So I'll be shooting the French at this and the English at that. Alright, let's take care of it. Okay, once again, the red die does well. That's not good. Hey, what's our terrain here? We might have some effect. It looks like we're at the same height. Those woods will probably present something. Oh, the village. Is there a village here? Yeah, there's village here. Village provides a defensive benefit. Oops. Okay. Well, we'll ignore the effect that it's had before. And the English are not hit here. The French are hit. They take the disorder. Now they make the check to see if they rout or are decreased. They take a reduction as well. So they're down to -2. Not really more fiddly than, you know, the TSS type system. You're firing, you're taking hits. A little bit more so in terms of number of die rolls, though, but maybe a little less in terms of how many counters are being placed on the board. So I'd say it's pretty much a wash that way. I do like the level of abstraction that it provides comparatively, though. I don't like that pretending that I've got 800 casualties on the unit or whatever. That's, even if they're, stragglers that are never coming back or whatever, that always feels like I'm getting too much information. All right. And now we continue down the line. So when I say, it looks like too much information, it means, when I say that, I mean that I'm getting information that the game actually isn't accurately representing. Okay? Not that I'm uninterested in the specific number of casualties. I might be very interested in that. It's just that the more that I look into those games, the less believable they tend to be. The CWB system uses a similar type of design where you can have units, taking absolute casualties all the way to 100%. Just by recovering the units and throwing them in the line. Same thing happens with the TSS, Great Battles of the American Civil War. Units fall apart before that, so some of those casualties aren't real. And they give you this impression because when you read the history, you hear about units taking 60% casualties, and that being a big deal. And then you kind of say, oh, yeah, but I took 85. No, you didn't. You really didn't. And because it's giving you that deep insight into some kind of game mechanism, and I'm not saying it's terribly unrealistic, I'm just saying it's giving you this insight into this game mechanism that gives an impression that is false. That's kind of my worry with that. Certainly when I was younger, I thought, wow, I'm really doing things terribly different. And I think I am. And you track casualties in the game. And the casualties will always end up higher. It tries to pretend that it means something that I don't think when you step back and try to assess the system. Maybe the designer intended it to mean that. But the reality is you're getting reasonable results if you kind of multiply those casualties by, 0.8 or something, and say some of that's unit cohesion that's disappearing. I am happier with a game which just reflects the unit cohesion directly at this stage in my life. I just think it's more honest. Shit. So I realized I was calculating those all out as full frontal fire, the full fire phase. That was supposed to be the advancing half fire phase. What I'm going to do to remediate that situation is to put a half fire after it, because I can't really fix it. So normally we would have done the artillery canister. I think gets to fire twice, actually. Wow, the Allies are just wrecked here coming in. From what I can tell, yes, the artillery fire gets to come in twice, because I've been trying to look to see, hey, are you limited in the number of times you can fire the artillery each turn? And I don't see any limitation on it. They can fire each time they're fired at, and it happens before they're fired at when it's infantry firing at them. Well, actually, each time there's a fire phase. So yeah, we're gonna just see those Anglo-Allies melt some more. I'm gonna do the half fire phase at this point to fix the issue anyway. As you can see, though, they're already melting away pretty fast if you look in there. Frontal assaults don't seem wise. I don't know what else to do, though. Frontal assault the cav, it'll run away. And I'm having trouble getting to it right now. And the half fire didn't have much effect. I routed one unit. That's about it. So chances are the half fire wouldn't have done much on the, had all the units been firing it, and then the main full fire would have hit everything. So that's the end of an assault activation, And now if the Brits take another activation over here and do a standing assault, it'll be without that half fire being in at all. Oh, it's not the end. I have a shock opportunity, and I may want to take that. Let's take a look at how shock is going to work here, because odds help me here. And it's totally optional, but I think I'd like to shock something. See, I got 2 units here, but they've got 2 units, and we'd be low odds there. Let me think about this a little. My first reading of the rules, and then when I explained it, I didn't really explain how shock works. It's a weird little system here. I explained, hey, there's lots and lots of die roll adjustments, but essentially what you're going to be doing is rolling on this little table here to see what happens to the defender. And then after the shock, the attacker has to make a normal disruption check. So I think shock is something I want to do. I think it's the reason that I attack, actually. The problem is I can't shock with my disordered units, so I can shock into here and into there. I've got terrain against me. Let's take a look at how it's going to work. And maybe I'll decide not to. I've got 10 strength points here to what looks like 12 for the French. I don't think that minus counts into for anything. So we're going to be, we moved into place, so we'll be at 1-to-1 because we round in our favor in that case. This reminds me of the musket and pike design, actually. Well earlier than it was created. An interesting predecessor to it. Okay. At least for the shock side of things. So now what other modifiers? We get the defender's morale modifier. It's going to be a 0 on those Irish at the top. We got the odds ratio. The terrain. The terrain there is village. That can't be good. That's -2. That's going to make it unlikely for me to do anything. Shocking through flank, rear. Wow, flank is more painful than rear. This is actually not a real modifier. You can still shock unsupported artillery with disordered units, but you automatically eliminate them. Okay. So we're looking at -2. It's unlikely I'm going to do anything. I need an 8 or a 9. But let's try. I do not get it, and now now I'm only allowed to shock this unit because this unit's shocking this unit. Like I could have combined if this unit could have shocked this, but it can't. Okay, so now I check my own morale, which is just a 0. And we look for, I guess, the regular morale check. Damned if I remember what that is. And I think a 3 is okay. I think I'm looking for a 5 or a 6 here, just like I would with fire disorder. I'm modified by the defending unit's morale modifier. That doesn't really make sense if it's the post-fire. I think that must be, see, this looks like an automatic disorder. That's the problem. Yeah, this is a disorder. It's capitalized. So anything special about this? The unit's modified melee. The unit's melee modifier rating. There is no melee modifier rating. There's just the morale rating. 6 or higher is a disorder. Okay. And now we'll do the other one here. I was going across a stream. That's probably an effect too. Not that I caused anything, but maybe I just didn't want to do these. Across a shallow stream would be another -1. I've got more of a chance of disordering myself than the opponent. So in reality, I wouldn't have conducted these after having looked at what all the modifiers are. So I'm not going to continue with this because this one had no effect. Over here, if I want to shock, I could be shocking at 1 to... I have to take both into account. 1 to 3 rounded up to my... well, 1 to 2.5 rounded into my favor. So that would end up being a 1 to 2 modifier. Now, that would be a -2 right there. Again, a problematic situation. I could take out a couple of guns if I'm really successful, but all I'm going to do is disorder these units, and they're not, well, this one's disordered, so it might break. Whereas I'm pretty likely to actually suffer a break effect. So again, I'm going to hold off on it, although it may be my best chance there. All right, that's the end of the Anglo-Dutch activation of this unit. And now I think we're in the limbs phase. I need a break after that. Feels like a comedy of amateurs, but I'm still struggling to use the units effectively. I went through this a long time in Musket and Pike, and probably will if I pick it when I pick it up again. Fugger here moved forward, and he's left a unit out of command. That can catch up eventually. I'm just hoping to be able to cause some effect there, and didn't want to pull everything back. Over here then, I get Zerlauben, and he's not close enough to charge. You gotta be 2 hexes away to launch a carousel or fire move charge. I'm not that close. I don't really want to move off my hill position, so I'll stand up there. I'd really like to use it, but I was actually counting on being able to hit them at this range. Actually, is it 1 or 2 hex movement? It's gotta be legitimate there. Let's see. Either 2 hexes distant or when the cav is adjacent. I've got to be allowed to move then first. Let me look at this some more, because I'm not really getting this. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense if I start out adjacent to the enemy that I'm doing a carousel. I'm in real danger. That's precisely how it is. It says much the same as a foot assault. So, you know, I'm going to have to essentially wait for the English to move out of the swamp before I launch my attack, I guess. I certainly don't want to give them an opportunity to assault me. Now, they can't assault me from the range they're at either, so they get to move a little closer, form up, and then I'll be able to try to disrupt them with it. Time's on my side, but it sucks to have to pass my chit. Had this chit come up first, I would have been in position though. So I can't say I'm too disappointed with having put one in play. I drew the French artillery limb counter. And here's what bugs me. I know these counters exist. They're reaction fired counters. I can find nothing in the rules to indicate that artillery can't fire after reaction firing. That they're limited to 1 shot per turn or something like that. In fact, it wouldn't make sense if it said reaction fired, because your initial fire would also prevent that. If anything, limited fire should be you don't get 2 rounds of fire at the enemy in a close combat as well. Nothing about that. I don't think there's any limitation. I think I can unload with those artillery again that fired already. I'm not sure what those counters are for. I looked in the newer Fields of Fire rule or Fields of Glory rule book, and that doesn't seem in any way significantly different. Like I said, I think I said, I read someone's comment saying they're glad they had the Fields of Fire because it's got a lot of the errata cleared up in it or whatever. Well, I don't see too much other than the kind of clunky using these D6s for some things and not knowing which die to use. That's really an issue. Largely, that hasn't mattered too much. You might get some really weird results where things were meant to be 50-50 and they seem almost absolutely certain on the six-sided die, but with a low target number, the dice actually react somewhat similarly, so it's not that big a deal which way you go. But this is just leaving me with geez, I don't know if this is reasonable. It feels like the artillery is just too potent. Of course, it is a half-hour turns, so there several rounds can be fired during that period. So I guess it's not completely unreasonable to allow some reaction fire, especially when you're talking about canister fire up here, you know, where they're really pumping the shots out in the reaction fire. Counter battery fire maybe is a little harder to argue, except that when you've got good counter battery targets, you might be actually pumping out more rounds. So again, you know, rather than track ammunition, using some kind of abstracted version like this to say, well, you don't just shoot as much as you possibly can all the time. The guns need to cool down and everything, but you become a little less careful when you're directly being threatened. Anyway, I'm assuming there is no limitation. Onward with the artillery. Ways in which this game is odd. This unit up here had a couple of hits against it. Got hit with artillery fire. Let's put these down. And routed. Turns around. 2 movement points. I need 4 movement points. I have 4 movement points. I need 5 to be able, or 3 more to be able to cross this stream. So I take another hit, and in this case that was enough to eliminate it. It had 2 hits against it. For all the effects over here, and then even some effective counter battery fire against a gun that had already limbered to try to get out of there. I screwed up with my English. They're down below the hilltop level, which means most of the French guns have a bonus firing at them. We're really kind of lighting up, at least getting a better table on them. Also, the French, if they fire outside of the village, they get 2 shifts in their defense in that case when they're fired back on. So the defensive position is really beginning to tell. I don't know how Marlborough is supposed to handle this, but I don't know how to handle units in an attack. So far, the defense seems pretty easy, at least with infantry and artillery. The defense with cav, man, that's a tough job here. How to use them effectively, and I've got them placed out in front, again, because I think that's what they're meant to be used for. But I can't quite figure out how to make them work right. Done with those limbs, whatever the hell they stand for. I would like to look that up, actually. There's a glossary somewhere. Unfortunately, it's not in there. Not surprising. Maybe it's in the command section. Leader initiative marker. Okay. Whatever. Doesn't seem like initiative to me. Anyway, moved forward over here, and the British artillery got to fire. We got canister range shots coming in here because the French we're trying to cross across. We'll see if they get any traction there. The Brits get their first move, so if they can move, they'll be able to move Orkney one hex. Well, half movement points, which might be able to get them more than 1 hex away. We'll see. Alright, and we finish up going to 230. Had a couple of units out here that looked like they were out of command. Now they're now linked up with this command, but they had already been activated, so they didn't get the opportunity to check morale at that point. A little bit of slow movement in some locations, forming up a line where you might see an engagement. This is beginning to feel a lot like some minis games that I've played where units don't move very far. They have fairly slow movement allowances. And it's very difficult to move the units. Actually, I'm thinking of a system that's based on the linear designs. I've mentioned it before. What is it called? Warfare in the Age of Reason, I think, is what it's called. It was. It was a very, very nice system, kind of a high level like this is, not like Battles from the Age of Reason, which feels a little bit more detailed than this does. It's becoming very clear to me that reserves are going to be important in this, that throwing another unit in after you break the first unit might be of some value, but quite how to go about that seems difficult to comprehend. But clearly, if you've got a stretched out line and it breaks like here in one particular location, the attacker can then sort of wheel his unit slowly and start rolling up the flanks around it. So you'd better have something to throw in that hole in a way that most more flexible movement games don't seem to allow or don't seem to take account for. We'll see. We'll see how much resilience a unit that's being put under a lot of pressure has. Yeah, the French wanted to charge forward, but they didn't get their activation roll. Maybe they'll choose a limb for that. It's hard to decide, though. It's really tough to decide which limbs are going to be valuable to you and which are not. Certainly, the more you get familiar with the system, I think it'll be easier. We got some points to score here. 11, 12, 13 more Anglo points gone. This is not looking good for them at all. And now I got to keep them kind of here. Some of them will sort into... I like to keep a dead pile for one thing, but some of them are going to sort into the Blenheim. And yes, I listened to the pronunciation. It's either Blinden or Blenheim, depending on where you are. Anyway, some of them are going to sort into a particular bag for the battle, and some of them are going to sort into a bag for all battle, for both battles, essentially. All right. I think we've got more than enough video on this one, so let's send it up. And you can see we're making some pretty decent progress. I'm being particularly verbose because I'm discovering a new system.